Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born January 30th, 1882 in Hyde Park, New York. He went to school at Harvard University and also Columbia Law School. He married Eleanor Roosevelt in 1905. He was diagnosed with polio at the age of 39, which made him the first president to have a significant physical disability. He became a member of the New York Senate in 1910 and was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy by President Wilson. He was a Democratic nominee for vice president in 1920. In the midst of the Great Depression, he was elected president in November 1932. In 1936, he was re-elected president, which he wound up being for a total of 12 years. On April 12, 1945, he died from a massive stroke. Roosevelt was elected president in the midst of a financial crisis that left many unemployed, homeless, and broke and scared. Roosevelt developed the Fireside Chats as an informal name for the series of radio broadcasts that he delivered as a means of direct communication with the American public. He did this to calm Americans and try to rebuild their trust in the banking systems. Roosevelt appeals to Americans' emotions throughout the speech, but one example is when he utilizes their sense of patriotism in paragraph 1. By stating that he worked with both Democrats and Republicans and the National Congress as a whole, he is citing credible sources with no biases. Roosevelt doesn't try to hide what's going on and try to make it seem better than it really is. In doing that, he appeals to the logic of his audience by acknowledging that the situation is pretty bad, but he also makes it easier to understand. By doing that, he makes it easier for the audience to move forward and start to regain trust in the banking system. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is the one who is delivering the speech. He is covering the speech through radio broadcasts addressing the Emergency Banking Act of 1933. He does this in order to inform his audience of everyday Americans. He is informing the Americans of legislation and trying to spark hope and calm them. The subject of discussion is the current financial crisis in America. His tone tends to be reassuring and colloquial when he refers to the audience as his friends and says that they will not have another epidemic of bank failures. He tries to prevent any misunderstanding to his audience by using terms like "in other words," by making previous statements a little more simple and easier to understand. He asks the audience questions that he already knows the answer to, which is hypophora. Examples of this is in paragraph 9 and paragraph 8. He uses metabasis to explain what is being done with banking in terms that average Americans can understand, and also so they can know what's going to be done next. He repeats "we" throughout the speech, which is an example of anaphora. He has a somewhat instructive and preachy tone in the beginning of the speech when he explains what he's going to be going over and when he goes over steps that he and other members of the government are doing to make banks safe for Americans to put their money in again. He uses short and precise language in order for the average Americans to understand and not feel too overwhelmed. Throughout his speech, he goes from a more formal tone to more colloquial tones. An example of this is in paragraph 2. He chooses words like friends and constantly repeats "we" so that he can create a sense of unity between himself and the Americans listening in on the chat. An example is in paragraph 1. Roosevelt was the first president to utilize public radio as a way to connect with common Americans. Our economic state today is often compared to that of the Depression. Roosevelt's words of wisdom guided America through some of the worst economic days in history. That being said, if anything happens again, we can use his fireside chats as a way to calm and bring new ideas.